Hello. Hey everybody. There's Morse code 4477.5. 4477.5. Upper sideband, I'm hearing a call from a station ACP 51. ACP 51. That is weird. I've never heard Morse code there. I don't know what that is. I need to check that out. 4478. What is that? ACP 51. Some kind of Morse code signal. If anybody knows what that is, 4477.5 upper sideband and a station calling ACP 51, and it's sending Morse code. Okay. Hey everybody, welcome aboard, and we are live from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. This is the Wednesday edition of the Shortwave show. Yeah, we have a Wednesday edition, for those that don't know. And of course, we try to entertain and have fun with Shortwave radio. Today we have a specific subject which will be solar activity. And we're going to talk about the effects of solar activity on the shortwave bands, the propagation. We'll talk about the state of solar cycle 24 versus in going into 25, and hope you enjoy the show today. My name is Gilles, located in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, northeast part of North America, and of course we talk about shortwave radio. Anything below 30 megahertz, yeah, we do sometimes go like, in other frequency ranges, but most of what we talk about is roughly 30 megahertz or below. And hope that you enjoy. There's a really nice chat room with beautiful people that are there to answer questions and chat about radio and anything. So nice to hear. I'll open my beer. So I've got a big Don de Dieu 9% beer that I will actually open up now. Last time I opened one, I'm going to hold it because last time I just removed the cork and and it just flew off. So I'm going to be extra careful this time. I'm kind of a little scared now. And here we go. Here we go. So I'll open up that beer. And here we have a beautiful beer. Ta-da! So cheers everybody. Really good. Always good. So this is interesting. Okay, look at that. The station on 4477.5 Morse code. I'm just going to remove the water on the pad. There we go. So the Morse code from the station, and put water on it. It'll take 2 seconds here. We're going to try it out. No water on the trackpad. So here we go. It says the ACP 51 NR 1988 Unclass Intercom 333, whereas it does test your station capability, there is no other reason to check in on each channel utilized during a given NTN. And so he's there, and he's transmitting Morse code. I don't know, some kind of Mars station? I don't know. Anybody have an idea? 4477.5 upper sideband. I'm intrigued by that signal now. Once again, what's nice, and you know when I say that I like SDRs, well, I was able to see that signal on the waterfall. It's faster now. ACP, ACP, ACP to ACP 51. What is ACP? Air? What is it? What's ACP station 51? That is intriguing. I like when shortwave shows up like that. So anyways, we're going to say hi to everybody in the chat room. And hope that you enjoyed today's show. And if anybody knows what that is, well, I really wonder what that is. 4477.5 upper sideband. So kind of interesting. Okay, hey there, Terry Cook. Nice to have you on board from Big County Country and KF7BQ. Big Sky Country. Bobby Burgess, nice to have you here from Morgan City, Louisiana. W85107 SWL. Jay Watterson 69, nice to have you here. Radioactive, nice to have you on board. W7WXV from Oregon. Brent, nice to have you here from Brockville, Ontario. Always cool to see you. WF7I, nice to have you on board from Virginia. What do we have? William Helms, nice to have you here from Florida. HF Zone, nice to have you here. Rufus Newt, nice to have you on board from the Laurentian Valley, Ontario. Pretty cool. Scott Reed, nice to have you on board. Not hearing anything in Oregon on 4477.5 upper. Rick Sadder, nice to have you here. Unpopcom, nice to have you on board from South Central Pennsylvania. Brian Penny, nice to have you here from Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Joe Rutman, nice to have you here. Zach Ariantel, nice to have you on board. East Tone, you're stoned. Kevin Wood, nice to have you here, my friend. From Nova Scotia, Canada. Jerry DX, nice to have you on board. Northern Dawn, nice to have you here. Hey Glenn, in Toronto, Canada. Randy in Riverside, California, nice to have you here. A beautiful chat room with big wall and beautiful doors. Oh man. Dave Todd, nice to have you on board from Grimsby, Ontario. Scott Reed says, that's a nice beer, but I don't drive before 9 p.m. That way I am never an alcoholic. Jeff King, nice to have you here, my friend, from hot Florida. Bloody Creep, nice to have you here, my friend, from warm Central Florida. Jeff Barrett, nice to have you here, my friend. And he's copying 4477 on his Sony ICF 7600 JR in Cincinnati. Cool. Mark Ledford, nice to have you here, Mark. Pretty cool. Bob Geis, nice to have you here, Bob, from Long Beach, New York. N2DET. I Browler, nice to have you here from Granger, Indiana. Ray in Clayton, North Carolina. Sidvic, nice to have you here. Skateboarding 118 from Vancouver, Canada. Hey, Tag Guy, nice to have you here. Paul M, nice to have you here. Bro Weaver, nice to have you on board from St. Louis, Missouri. Paul M is from Buenos Aires. Nice to have you here from Argentina. Chuck CP Davis, nice to have you here from Minneapolis. David Green, nice to have you on board. Happy autumn. Hot tip, the MLA30 loves the bias T on the RSP1A. Cleared up a lot of noise for me. Air India Radio 9445 today. Turkey real clear too. But in Air India, All India Radio was very, very strong today. I was hearing it really well at around 2100. Propagation was actually really good. I'm wondering if it's not more propagation than anything else. But to continue testing, it'll be interesting to check that out, of course, for sure. And I still love my MLA30. That is an amazing antenna. So what else did he say here? Same thing again, but a little faster. I want to know what that station is. So ACP51, NR1988, with the date, FM, AVS, AVS2 to ACP, ACP2, unclassed intercom, whereas it does test your station capability. There is no other reason to check in on each channel utilized during a given NTN. What is that? Anybody knows what that is? I'm gonna tell you, it's interesting. So pretty intriguing signal here on 4477.5. It's not on 114.170 fast load. It's 4477.5. That is a frequency you see there. 14170 is just the frequency from FLDG's internal log capability and thing. The frequency I'm listening to is 4477.5 upper sideband right now. So kind of interesting. Northern Dawn, all across the shortwave spectrum, there are some utility signals in Morse from time to time, but it's not used a lot. There's not a lot of them. Most of them will be channel markers or that will actually just say, VVV, which means calling all stations from WLO or SVO, or the Greek station I hear often, TAH, the one in Turkey, 4477.5 upper sideband. Right now it's silent, but I just heard two transmissions from a station ACP51, which I don't know what it is. ACP51. So I'm just trying to find something here. 4477.5 kilohertz shortwave, ACP51. Let's try to find something. NR1988. What is that? What is that? I'm not finding anything, and that is driving me nuts. So it's in CW, which means it's probably 4478.5 CW. Let's check it out here. I ain't getting any entries in Google that is giving me info on that station. That is interesting. Morse code, ACP51 station. Nothing at all. I'd like to know what that is. So right now I'm hearing just a chirp chirp. You're probably hearing that, the chirp chirp from the CODAR, which is ocean wave radar. But it's intriguing, honestly. John McClure, nice to have you here. No, it's 4475.5 kilohertz. It's in the shortwave spectrum. 4477.5 kilohertz. So it's 4.4775 megahertz. Northern Dawn. Bob Guy says aircraft DACs. I don't know. Oh, really? There's an entry for that on HF Underground? Okay, let's check that out. ACP51. What is that? Where did you find it in the HF Underground? Let me just log in here. Okay. HF beacons. What did you What section did you check for that entry? Out of curiosity. HF zones. I just linked it. Look above this. I sent it about 10 minutes ago. Okay. This is kind of interesting. This is kind of really, really interesting here. I'm looking at what that could be. Very interesting. Yeah, that chirping is Kodar, they've talked, which is a... yeah, it's quiet right now. He stopped about 4 minutes ago. I'm gonna keep it there a little bit because I'm intrigued. Don't know if he's gonna come back. But I definitely... so whereas it does test your station capability, there is no other reason to check in on each channel utilized during a given NTN. That's, and it says unclass intercom 333. So unclass, which probably means unclassified intercom 333. And it gives the date and it gives the time that it was sent. Very, very interesting. It's a date. It's dated September 19th. This is at and 25th at 12:05 Zulu, from something like that. Huh? Interesting. This is very interesting. Honestly, I like those weird things. NTN VoiceNet is intended to be a backbone of HF infrastructure. Feel free to use it to list your pending traffic. Oh, it's interesting because somebody heard it on 6807. 6807 is the list here. Oh, kind of interesting. Very strong CW station is popped up routinely on Sunday and Wednesday nights. Here on Wednesday night, 6807, I got in on 4477.5. Even picked up on a cheap portable receiver. Message is transmitted at 8 words per minute, then repeated at 14. That's what we had, then disappears. I never hear any responses. Oh, this is nice. So I just got some weird signal that I don't know what it is. It's kind of cool when you think about it. Some kind of weird transmission. I love shortwave for that. I can tell you that. So yeah. So if it follows what the guy just said, I heard the 8-minute and the 14-minute, and I guess it started just before the show. Like I noticed it in the waterfall at about 23:57 UT. So this is an interesting thing. Really, really cool. Jeff Barrett says, you stumbled across a clandestine KGB transmission. The chair is against the door. Oh, man. You know, I was actually, the reason I was down here, 4477, was simply because I was looking for the buzzer on 4625. So I wanted to see if I could hear 4625 buzzer. And so 4625, let's go back, which is I'm not hearing any buzzer. And while I was doing that on 4477, or at roughly at that spot, I started seeing a signal, and I thought, what's that? And you have the eye for a signal, so it's kind of interesting. So really nice. Yeah, 4530, 4480. There's if you look here, the Kodar goes from about 4440 all the way up to 4590 almost. There's a WeatherFax on 4610. There's a weak weather fax. What's 4610? Isn't that the let me just check out here. 4610 kilohertz WeFax shortwave. Yeah, that's GYA weather from it's Northwoods Radio out of the UK. If you guys want to try to decode a radio fax from England, it's the UK. It's not super strong here. It's there, but it's let's just try it. We'll try it with let's try multi-PSK. Do I have it here? Yeah, multi-PSK. We'll try to see if I can decode that weather fax out of receive. Okay. Fax. Okay. Where's the lines that I could find? Is it here? Trying to. That is weird. Just gonna check something here. Options. Sound card. That is weird. It's a weird looking thing here. For some reason. I should have let's just put this whole weaker here. That is not coming out of the sound card. Options. I haven't tweaked this. Configuration. Config screen. Let me just check it out here. What's the default sound? That's what I hate of multi-PSK, is trying to find that darn. Okay, sound card input. Stereo mix. That's weird. That's what I want. Stereo mix. Here we go. Oops. Okay, closed it. Multi. So we'll try to have it. So this is Northwoods Radio. It's GYA in England on 4610. So it just stopped. Of course, as I wanted to decode something, it's probably going to start again. Norton Dawn says that the voice of Greece is strong tonight. Yeah. Steve P, nice to have you here, says NATO military committee. It's possibly. It's possible. NATO in Morse code? That's possible. VA3DLO, let's have you here. My clock is not off. It's actually perfect. It's 024 UT. And it's a UTC. In UTC time, we are the 26th and not the 25th today. We just crossed midnight, UTC. Yes, in North America, we're on the 25th. But on UTC time, we are 024. We passed midnight, September the 26th. So UTC time, we are now on the next day. Who knows? There Combat Patrol 51, maybe. Maybe. I don't know. So yeah, 4610 was GYA in England, and I think it stopped. TOT, nice to have you here, my friends. GRF, Gerf, nice to have you here. It says, what decoder software is being used? Oh, never mind, multi-PSK, yeah. I had multi-PSK, and I had before that for the Morse code. I was using, oh yeah, this is more standard. Wasn't using the correct input. Let's try one from Boston. Is there 4230 4274 something? No, 4270. What's this one? That's teletype 43. Any propagation of a weather fax? Trying to see what we can get here. 6350. What's the other weather fax frequency here? That's teletype. Anyways, trying to what's that? Oops. Kind of interesting to see these signals here. So it's interesting. Listening to these weird signals. So 4625, we are back. Still nothing. Oh, there's EAM, I think. Yeah, 4724. 4724. So that's nice. We got a diversity of signals tonight. Kind of cool. So yeah, maybe it's Civil Air Patrol. It's possible. It's possible. ACP. It could be a Civil Air Patrol thing. I don't know what that is exactly. Kind of cool. Jeff Barrett says that the HF Global Command was very active this week, 4724. So, kind of interesting. Radioactive. One cannot confuse multi-PSK with anything else, that is for sure. Bro Weaver. Yeah. You know, that's the thing. It's like when you make reception reports. I've always talked to everybody saying, well, you make reception reports. Remember that there's you know, you have to write in the UTC time when you write for the programming. Sometimes it's easy to forget that. 4724 was the frequency. 4724. David Green says, are there any settings in the RSP1A that can help me pick up long-wave beacons on the MLA30? I look for CW carriers with airport abbreviations. The thing on long-wave is simply to remember to remove the notch. So in the main, if you're using SDR Uno on the upper left, you have medium wave FM, and that you can turn it on or not, and these are disable or enable the broadcast notch, and you have to make sure that that is enabled, I believe, for long wave. So for example, 248 here, local airport, here's one for you. And I'd be curious if I would be able to turn the loop right now, because long wave is very directional. But 248 kilohertz right now, for example. So make sure that you just put the notch on. If you don't, you will have spurious signals from the medium wave band. A lot of them showing up on the long wave band. For sure. Make sure the RF gain isn't set too high if you're very close to some stations also. That's very, very important to be careful. I hope I didn't miss anybody saying hello. Please say hello again if I did not say hello. I'm using the MLA30 loop. MLA30 loop. So this is a Chinese $50, $50 loop. Rodrigo Galter, nice to have you here, Rodrigo. Noise floor isn't too bad. It's, you know, it's, in my case, it's city noise floor, which is always a little higher than when you're, you know, somewhere else. But that's mainly what you got to do. Just make sure that it's not desensitized due to very strong medium wave stations. So anything else showing up here? So we're going to talk tonight about solar activity a little bit. $4875. What station is that? Sounds like Portuguese or Spanish, or what's on 4875? Oh, Radio Difusora Romera from Brazil, and it's okay. Let's check it out. It's back on frequency 4875. That technically should be Wednesday, Friday, Monday to Saturday. It's interesting because it's not. It's okay, 10 to 0505. Yeah. So this is Brazil, 4875. Wow, I haven't heard that one in a long time. 4875, Brazil coming in. Propagation seems to be quite interesting tonight. 60 meter band, pretty cool. So cool, Teal, nice to have you here, my friend, of course. Vince Perrault, nice to have you on board. Vince. Scott Reed, have you compared that loop to a dipole? The only compare that I can do is with my sloper. Thing is, if you have very quiet environment, I would think a dipole probably beats the loop. But it is dependent on your environment being very quiet. A series of MLAs. It is very interesting. You know what, guys? I actually positioned the W6LVP at 90 degrees from my MLA30, and what I noticed is that it gives me extremely crappy reception when positioned in that. So I need to keep it pretty much the way it already is. So I actually even put it back so they're parallel, and for having them to work. So right now, you guys don't see it, but my ICOM here, that's on that side, is on the W6LVP loop, while my RSP1A is on the MLA30 loop right now. So kind of nice. You know, why not, John McClure? Do stuff. Do post YouTube videos. Rodrigo Galter says, good night, listening to Shortwaves in Brazil on Tex NPL 600. Very good spread tonight. Cool. So we're listening to Brazil right now, 4675. Radio Difusora Romera. Northern Dawn wants a loop to transmit on 40 meters. I believe the W6LVP loop has a transmit loop available. It's there's a model that is a receive transmit loop. Brent, the XH Data D808, you're going to have a lot of fun with it. I can tell you that. It's an amazing little yeah, Bro Weaver, that is an interesting idea. Actually, I've ordered a second MLA30. It's supposed to arrive. I ordered it yesterday, so it's gonna arrive like next week. And it's all in the spirit of that MLA-30 will be a portable Perry Island or whatever the expedition antenna. Rob, nice to have you here, my friend. Northern Dawn's getting Radio Marti on 7335. That usually comes in quite good, actually, Radio Marti. So it's nice to see Brazil, 4875. And 4885 is also Brazil, by the way. 4885 is also Brazil. This one is coming in also in Portuguese. 4885 is Brazil. Hey, Prasad Al-Sodekar, nice to have you here from India, Prasad. So 4885 is Radio Club do Para in Brazil, which is 4885. It's also coming in tonight. Really nice to see these signals tonight. There's a strong signal on 4980. What's 4980? 4980. Oh, it's W. Oh, I didn't. I forgot. That's true. WRMI out of Miami, out of Okeechobee, Florida, is broadcasting on 4980 up to 100 UT. Hearing it right now. 4980. 4980. WWV on 5 megahertz. $5010. Is that also WRMI? 5010 is it's in Spanish. And I would guess that is here on the list. It doesn't say they're broadcasting, but I would guess. Yeah, it is. Okay. It's Radio Slovakia Spanish via WRMI on 5010. 60 meters seems to really be broadcasting well. Wow, really nice. Rodrigo Galter has BBC on 7300. Yeah, that one has been a little weaker lately. It's there. It was so much better this summer. As we're getting into the shorter days, it's weaker than it was. So 7300 is from the Wolverton, UK transmitter site, BBC.
We can't do it alone. We are subject to the pollution levels of other countries, and we are becoming carbon neutral by 2050. There is a legislation that's going to demand that, and we're all doing a lot of things, but all the pollution.
So talking about pollution from Montreal and whatever. So kind of interesting. What is there? Let's go down. Let's go down. Terry Cook says NTN reference in the CW comms National Traffic Net, national level nets of Civil Air Patrol, known collectively as the National Traffic Net, serve as a primary conduit for cross-country message traffic. Cool, Terry. Thanks for the research. So that means we were listening to the Civil Air Patrol, and they were broadcasting kind of a message, kind of waiting for a callback, probably. and if they had no traffic, then nothing would happen. That's why they stopped. Kind of interesting. Okay, cool. That's the first time I was hearing that tonight. Never heard that before. I heard the Civil Air Patrol before. They have a net on Fridays at 19 UT, around 19 UT, on 14902. And I've heard Civil Air Patrol and other frequencies as well. But it's the first time I hear that CW signal. Kind of cool. Donald Hosmer, nice to have you here. Yep, WRMI, till 100. Rodrigo Galter, WWV PPE, station out of Brazil on 10 megahertz or 5 megahertz. Radioactive 7570, WRMI, strong in Oregon. Bro, you were so far, I hear no brothers there, and that is a good thing. Yeah, later in the night. Later in the night, it's Levi Nathan, nice to have you on board. 0336 local time in Israel, watching your show. Shalom, my friend from Israel. 4Z1008 SWL. And let's try Israel. Let's see if we can hear 4XZ. Yeah, look at that, my friend from Israel. We're hearing 4XZ station out of Israel, Morse code 6607 CW. So they're sending messages. Let's get FLDG back and have it run the CW here. There we go. There's in font. Let's make the receive font much bigger. Much bigger. There we go for this. Logging panel. Always forget where the fonts are. Anyways. So they're sending. They're sending like letter groups, as they usually do. Some coded messages, 6607. So that Morse code comes from Israel, by the way, 6607. So it comes from your part of the country, Levi Nathan. Northern Dawn, the Wolverton transmitter on 7300 is for the Middle East, so it's actually sending away from us. But I guess we're hearing a really good signal from the back. KC1HOX, nice to have you here, Glenn. Vince Perro says, I got voice on 4980 and a lot of digital sound too. What that noise is. Oh, you probably are getting on 4980, just above it. There's a radio teletype. So let's just put it 4980. Just above it, you have this radio teletype on roughly 4984. So this is radio teletype, and this is, I believe, encrypted radio teletype. William Helms, nice to have you here, working on a 38 feet of 8 conductor Cat 5e, 264 feet of wire. Wow. No problem, Levi Nathan. Corn Patch DX, nice to have you here, my friend from Iowa, KB0NMQ. Kevin Miles, nice to have you here. Thinking about selling his Ethon E1 XM radio and getting a dedicated shortwave radio that covers shortwave spectrum only with better filters. Any suggestions? I would. Do you need to have it portable, or you're really kind of looking maybe at tabletop, or does software-defined receivers sound interesting? Would you like to have something like that and play it with it on a computer, or so? Kind of interesting. So cool, William. Jason Francis, nice to have you on board. Bro Weaver says, amazing how they are all using old obsolete CW for secret codes. Why not use some high-tech encryption? Well, you know what? One of the interesting aspects of using Morse code is the simple fact that you don't need any equipment. All you need is a radio. And if the guy can decode Morse code in his head easily, which is easy for somebody that's really good at decoding, he can hear the codes and know what they're saying. So no need, because high-tech encryption, or digital modes, more like digital modes, because for encryption, that CW mode could be very encrypted. If you don't know what that refers to, you just don't know. But the if you would say like digital modes and stuff like that, well, you need equipment for that. You need to be able to decode it with a computer or a device. And Morse code's nice because they just decode it off their head and they know it. Yeah, Levy Nathan, I remember when I started, the first evening I started to listen to Shortwave, Levy Nathan, is in 1982. The first evening, one of the first top 10 stations I've received was Call Israel in English to North America. They were giving a very good signal back then. Northern Dawn has Iran in Spanish on 7230. Let's check that out. It's not making it here, but we do have some ham signals. What's on 72? 7223. So there's some ham stations on 40 meters. David Green, I read that it's possible to use a cheap 360 remote control TV antenna to rotate the loop somehow. It sounds really great, but I don't know where to start and what to get. How can I do that? Well, you know, the thing is, it's simply a rotor, and so if you look at old TV antennas, they used to have rotors to actually turn the antenna. So you might find one of the best places for that would be a ham fest. There often are people there that have old rotors and TV antennas for really cheap because they just want to get rid of it and use that for a loop. So that's possible. There's a lot of that on shortwave, Levy Nathan. Rare and weird signals. Yeah, Terry Cook, only receiver and one-time pads, absolutely. VE3KRP, nice to have you on board. And he's playing with the SDR Plate 2. Pretty amazing hardware, absolutely, amazing, absolutely. Bro Weaver, when does the 3 megahertz AM band come alive? Usually after sunset or longer? You will have it mostly nighttime, so just before sunset throughout the night, and maybe an hour or two after sunrise. In the winter time, sometimes it's longer. In midwinter here at 45 degrees latitude in Montreal level, in January it's almost 24 hours. I often hear hams mid-afternoon. So for example, here if I look at 3750, so there's a lot of ham stations on the 80 meter band tonight that I could see here. A lot of stations, so let's check one here. So that's one 3752. There's I don't hear anybody. Anyhow, somebody give a call out. And we had a proprietary material. I forget what the hell we called it. Lots of stations on 80 meters. That's where shock and vibe. This is 3700. Lots of nice signals on 80 meters tonight.
And very dry, so it's actually very pleasant.
So it's usually about an hour, roughly an hour before, an hour or two before sunset, and goes through the night usually. In the very, very deep nights of winter, sometimes it happens that the 80 meters isn't super great, like, you know, around midnight or 1 a.m. when the night is really long, but most of the time it's pretty good. So, hey guys, we're going to talk a little bit about solar activity, as this is the subject for tonight. So, solar activity impacts the shortwave listening hobby a lot, and that impact is, of course, more. We usually talk about it a lot when there's solar flares, and you know, now we're talking about solar minimum. We are in solar minimum pretty much. Actually, this summer we pretty much had no sunspots. The spots that appeared were very, very brief. It is almost a spotless summer that we had here in the northern hemisphere. We are at roughly 70% of the days of this year that have no sunspots. That's roughly what is the maximum amount of days in a solar minimum. What that tells us is that 2019 is possibly the deepest part of solar minimum right now. So let's cross our fingers, because sometime next year, towards the second half maybe, we might start seeing a little increase in solar activity. The next solar max is supposed to be 2023. Right now, the solar minimum we are living through right now is as deep as the solar minimum we lived through in 2008, which was one of the biggest and lowest and longest solar minimums we've lived through in the space age, and even longer. If we recap solar cycle 24, we are still technically in there at the bottom part. In transition to solar cycle 25 is the smallest solar cycle in 100 years. The last time the sun was so quiet at its solar max is in something like 1906. So it tells you that the solar cycle wasn't very, very big. So the sun has roughly 11-year cycles, and now that is an average. It's very important to understand that. 11 years is an average. Some cycles lasted only 6 years, some lasted 19 years. Just give you an idea. 11 is an average, but it's you know, the last 7 or 8 cycles were roughly 11 years. So the impact of the sun on shortwave is important, because it tells us that as shortwave propagation has an impact due to the fact that the ionosphere is ionized by the power of sunlight. So the radiation coming off from the sun actually will energize or create that layer and the layers of the ionosphere required for shortwave radio signals to bounce around. The higher the solar activity, the stronger the ionization. So some signals and some frequencies propagate more. And we're going to talk about solar minimum, because I see too many people ranting at, well, that's it, I'm coming back to the radio hobby in 2023 because right now it's dead, and it has to do with solar minimum. And I gotta say, it's far from the truth that you have to turn off your radio at solar minimum. I'm not the only one. A few people have agreed with me when I was saying last time we talked about this subject that some of the best DX I've ever had was during solar minimum. Some of the most amazing signals I received were during solar minimum. Look, we're at solar minimum. It didn't, you know, and I was able to hear that station I never heard before in CW. And there's a lot of signals, like 40 meters, 80 meters of spool. People are reporting voice of Greece 9420. You got to be careful with, solar minimum, reality, exactly what's happening for real. There's too much going on that people think that solar minimum is degrading shortwave to a point where there's nothing to listen to. And you got to understand that solar minimum does affect shortwave, absolutely. But it affects much more the upper part of shortwave than the lower part of it. So for example, 80 meters is not one of those bands much affected by solar activity because it's a nighttime band. In general, all the nighttime bands tend to stay relatively the same throughout a solar cycle. So at 80 meters will stay pretty much good. 60-meter tropical band will usually propagate whatever it's up or down in the cycle. Even sometimes there's enhancements. Some bands might actually give better results in solar minimum, so typically in the lower frequencies. But the higher frequencies do suffer, and one example is, if you remove sporadic E-skip, 10-meter band, pretty quiet. There's not a lot of activity there because solar activity is, of course, having an effect on the high frequency ranges. I would say that right now, anything above 20 megahertz is pretty dead. The only times this summer there was something there, sporadic E-skip was to blame, which is not dependent on solar activity. Sporadic E-skip is actually a different type of ionization. So most of the time, that can happen at any time, but there are times when there's more, like in the summertime, especially around the equinox, the solstice, sorry. And we gotta live through it. I mean, we are at solar minimum right now, and that is something we gotta live through. I'm just gonna look at the chat room a little bit and continue on after talking more about this. What else do we have? Kevin Miles says, just a base station type radio with digital readout under $1,000. I would look at the used market and get yourself a good, a good old Kenwood or ICOM that's a used radio, and you would have a pretty darn good radio, and just make sure it works well. At under $1,000, I would look at one of the big flagships that people always talk about how they are amazing in a tabletop style radio. Skateboard 118, has anybody ordered something from Anonco to Canada? How long did it take to arrive? The package left Canada 7 days ago, but my tracking hasn't updated at all. I have many radios that come from Anonco. He's a great seller. And the last two radios that I ordered from him, Texan PL680, I believe, and I don't know which other one, came through in a very fast amount of time. I typically had them received in less than like 2 weeks, not even. So be patient. There are a few things that can arrive, that can happen. One of the things is that the package can take sometimes, depending on the route that it has. Don't forget that one of the biggest problems sometimes is that the package can be actually held at customs, and when that happens, I can tell you, customs is it can hold it for a long time. Radioactive says solar activity. What solar activity? Rob says, oh, great topic, cool. Yeah, that's like WBCQ. Just order a 500 kilowatt transmitter and manage to screw it. Northern Dawn getting into space weather more. Yep. Paul M. The solar minimum could affect the weather in Earth. We're going to talk about that. Just going to go to make sure that I say hello to everybody, and we're going to talk about that. So weather, and there's already some studies on that. Bro Weaver, Global 24 would in your solar minimum if they survived. Their biggest problem was to really do nothing actually. As Glenn says, just be patient. But it's often fast, as long as it's not stopped by the customs. V3KRP, I worked the world on 20 meter this week. Absolutely. Randy Cummings, nice to have you on board. Says eBay has RCA rotors for that, which should be well enough for a loop. So you can check that out. Actually, is our sun dying? We're gonna check it out. We're gonna talk about that. Don't worry. Keisha Escape, nice to have you here. Got amazing DX last night. Was able to hear 80 meter hams from the East Coast here in the West, as well as a lot of Asia broadcast stations interfering. Got my XH data this weekend. Cool. Low bands have been better than ever for me this week. Receiving with the XH data whip folded down and inside. Cool. Dark Noise NL, nice to have you here. Can't sleep in the Netherlands? Maglone, nice to have you here. Randy Cummings, nice to have you here. I'm planning to put one on the MLA 30 loop on a tripod. Yes, that's a good idea. Rodrigo Galter, nice to have you here. 7305, I think that's Vatican Radio. Channel Master, yeah, nice. These Channel Master were the ones for TV most of the time. Terry Cook, a mounder minimum is an extended period of low total activity, much longer than normal cycles. Some worry that we are entering one. And I'll tell you we're not. And we're going to talk about it. So, yeah, the Radio Vaticana in Portuguese. Tina Smith, nice to have you on board. How big is my loop? I don't know. I've not measured it. It's not very big, actually. The MLA 30 is a small loop. And that is nice because it has a very, very small footprint compared to W6LVP loop that is much bigger. I like the MLA 30 actually for that. It's a smaller loop. So, okay, to answer some of the questions as we continue talking about solar activity. For the weather portion of it, there is, so at solar minimum, the sun does output a bit less energy. It's measurable with instruments. But as far as the science with the weather and trying to measure that, that output, does solar minimum and solar maximum affect the weather and everything? The data suggests that there's extremely little effect, and that because that lower output from the sun is actually so tiny, the difference is so small from minimum to maximum, that the effect on Earth is almost imperceptible. That said, some studies seem to say that they might have seen maybe a little cooling of Earth on average temperatures sometimes due to that. But we haven't been studying the sun long enough and the interaction with Earth long enough to definitely know this. Another example, as they were saying, I was reading a great article on solar activity. A lot of people saying, oh, well, look at that, these solar minimum, the solar activity is so low and those maximums are so small. The sun, there's something wrong. We don't know. We honestly don't know. We have been measuring the sun for 400 years. We have no idea if that's normal or not. The sun has been there for 4.5 billion years. This could be the normal. And what we have had in very big cycles could be something that's wrong. There is no scientific proof of anything wrong with all the cycles, because we haven't studied the sun long enough. We are still in the dark on a lot of what the sun is all about. We know, and we've learned a lot. We still have a lot to learn about the sun. There's so much going on. As for the boundary minimum, no, the sun isn't going there, and all the studies are showing that. And by the way, we got to be very, very careful, because the boundary minimum is often referred to as a time when there was no sunspots for a really long period of time, which is totally false. It's an extended period of very small cycles. But there's that period of time, there were still some cycles, and there were still some sunspots that were seen from time to time. It's just that the solar activity was much lower. Also, another false idea. A lot of people go to the conclusion that because there was in the Maunder minimum age, which was in I believe the 1700s, there was a period of time when the Earth cooled, and they called it the Little Ice Age, because even in Europe there were places where rivers froze when they never did, and as long as they could remember. It was colder across. I know that there are some stories of even here in North America where crops didn't grow in the summer in the 1700s, in that period of time, for because it was so cold that we had some of the coldest summers that they had measured. And it does coincide with the Maunder minimum somehow in the time period, but every study that's actually looking at that say it's a coincidence. It's not the Maunder minimum that did that. There was a coincidence, and it looks like something else did that. So we got to be careful with jumping to conclusions a lot. So the latest studies, because we are kind of learning more, the next solar cycle is stated to be around 2023. With a little luck, next year, sometime in the second half of 2020, we might start seeing a uprise in the solar activity. The next solar cycle, most accounts of the next solar cycle say that that's going to be roughly equal or slightly better in solar maximum than the last maximum we had. So that means it's not going to be a big maximum once again, for the most part. Some studies tend to say it might be a little more, but everybody agrees it's not going to be lower. It's at least going to be equal. And after that, and that's getting far because we're going to be real old by then. So already 2023, I mean 4 years from now, so I'll be 54. That means the next solar cycle maximum, 11 years later, would be I'll be at 65. So I'll be retired or something. Hopefully, I don't know. I don't know if I'll be doing YouTube live shows at 65. I might be doing them on some other weird platform. I don't know. So, and will I still be listening to Shortwave when I'm 65? I hope so. That cycle, most of the science behind it seem to say it's going to be a stronger cycle. We're going to kind of get back to higher cycles. And there's a lot of things happening with the cycles that is interesting because we are learning a little more. We're getting better at predicting the next maximums because there's a big pattern that's coming out as we look through. So there's 11-year cycle, but the sun has another one that's like a 30-year cycle, and there's another one that's an even bigger cycle. And all of these cycles, when you start looking at them, you kind of have a predictive pattern that goes through, and you're like, okay, that looks like 200 years ago, and it has in the same cycles and the same pattern. We might be going into that type of pattern in a bigger cycle. So that what we are seeing right now is that the next cycle should be at least equal, and the sun is just in a period of lower activity with its own magnetic field. And there's a lot of things that are coming out. There was a scientific paper that actually mentioned that there might be, that might have something to do with the interactions between Jupiter, the big planets like Jupiter, Saturn, the Earth, that have huge, that do have big, bigger gravity and also bigger magnetic fields, could be interacting with the sun itself. That has to be seen because the sun, just to give you guys an idea, if you take all the planets in the solar system, everything that's in the solar system except the sun, mash it up into one ball of matter and put it against the sun, the sun's mass is 99.999% of all the solar system. The sun is 99.9999% of all the mass. So you can see that the planets, even Jupiter that is big, have very little mass compared to the sun. So what is happening with solar minimum we are now, and where we are going? We did see our first two sunspots that are from cycle 25. So as we are exiting cycle 24, we're going into cycle 25. We did see this year two sunspots from the new cycle. How do we know that? Because each cycle, the polarity of the sunspots, because they're like big magnets if you want, change, they reverse. So two of the sunspots we've seen, one in July and one I think it was in May, had a reversed polarity. They were very brief, they weren't they didn't live long, but they are showing us one thing, is that the sun, the new cycle from the sun is coming up. So next year we'll probably going to see more of these reversed, and at some point we'll even see only cycle 25 spots. When that happens, that's when the new cycle officially starts. Solar minimum, the problem with it is that because it has less ionization of the ionosphere, higher frequencies tend to not propagate. What happens is that in solar maximum, the high frequencies can propagate because the ionosphere is ionized much more, so it's thicker, it's denser, and it actually can propagate 10 megahertz, 20 megahertz, 30 megahertz, so 10-meter band, and sometimes even more. What was happening, and an example of this is in the 50s when these super cycles, because in the 50s we had really amazing cycles. These super cycles were so strong that TV signals from North America were propagating like shortwave, and there was interference from European signals on TV, lower channels, and same thing for stations coming from North South America. They were interfering with each other. I remember, when I actually started listening to shortwave in the early 80s, what was interesting there was the fact that in the early 80s, we were at almost the peak in 1982. We were almost at the peak of a solar cycle. I remember turning on my CB and hearing skip every day, every single day, and listening and hearing all of these stations from the US that were skipping. And we couldn't even communicate well between each other here in the same city because the skip was actually interfering with all the communications on CB and on the walkie-talkies. So when solar activity becomes higher, of course, higher frequencies start propagating. Now, forget the myth of the solar activity and bad propagation of shortwave all the time. There are times when solar activity does give bad propagation. There are times when low solar activity might actually be a bad thing. But also, you got to be careful with always blaming solar activity for everything. Many times I've seen people complain and say, oh, well, it's solar minimum, that's why there's nothing to listen to. And the problem is, if all hams start thinking like that, what happens is hams tend to say, well, I'm not going to turn on the radio, we're at solar minimum. And they miss out on stuff. But because they're not on the air, and other people go and check out what's on the air, there's that thing going on where, oh, well, there's nothing to listen to. So I guess they must be right that this must be solar activity. So maybe I should also stop listening and wait till the cycle comes up. And where you see that is all crumbling down to not true is when we have contests. It's weird, but have you noticed that some of the bands that actually have no activity suddenly there's full activity when the contest arrives. You look at 15 meters, which is very quiet lately. And I'm sure 15 meters during the day sometimes probably does propagate when there's a little bit more solar flux. But nobody goes, nobody checks it. And those that do check it say, well, there's nothing there. And those that call CQ, well, there's not a lot of people checking, so maybe they missed their call. But it's funny, there's a contest and suddenly 15 meters, oh, look at that, there's signals. Interesting. I thought it was dead. Darn solar activity. So we got to be careful with that type of thing, and we're going to continue talking about that. What else do we have? What else do we have? Let's go down here slowly. WF7I Homebrew, Sunday night from about 02 to 03:30. Heard 20 distant non-directional stations on long wave. Heard Puerto Rico again, and new one from Cayman Islands. That is an example. That is an example of sometimes an improvement in some frequency ranges with low solar activity. Joey D, nice to have you here, my friend. We're here every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 0 UTC. Kisha Escape says, remember when the U.S. Air Force considered exploding plasma satellite to improve propagation in 2016? Joey D says, I've been listening to many different SDRs, and it's very cool to compare how they can receive a station compared to how I can in my regular radio, especially in medium wave. Absolutely, it's a lot of fun for that. It's a lot of fun for that. Randy says the MLA wire link is 81.25 inches. Thanks for the info. So, yeah, V3KRP, the space weather lady. What else do we have? It's nice to have you on board, Randy. KI4WOY. What else do we have here? Dark Knight and L, Ham, and CB bands will be better for us when retiring. We'll be DXing the world. You know, Randy, I am one. I adore 10 meters. When 10 meters is open, it's just so amazing of a band. Just so crazy. J169, so the Carrington event possibly wasn't part of the cycle, but instead was an anomaly caused by something else. Actually, the Carrington event is an interesting thing. So the Carrington event happened close to solar maximum of the year 18, something like 1850. The Carrington event is a really, really big solar flare. And it's not an anomaly, but it's something that the sun doesn't do very often. It's a very, very big and energetic solar flare that happened in that week, in that period of time. And there were several solar flares in several days. What made it even more potent is that when the plasma gas from that solar wind blown away by the solar flare is oriented in a specific way compared to our own magnetic field here on Earth, it actually gives it even more power. And that is what happens. So it's basically a super flare. You know, the biggest solar flare that we've actually measured in our space age is like an X. It's measured at something like X30. So when there's solar flares, we have C flares, M class flares, and X class flares. Now you might say, well, we're in solar minimum, so there's no flares. But no, if you go and check out flare lists, you'll see that the sun constantly sends out little C flares. But these are so small, they have no impact. And it's funny because a C flare the smallest C flare the sun does is equivalent to, you know, megaton atomic bombs on Earth, and not just one, many of them. But for the sun, that's like nothing. It's a super small flare. M flares are the medium-sized flare. Those can pack an impact. And then you got X flares. When you get an X flare, that's serious. That's a big flare. And for an X flare to be a Carrington event class flare, it has to be really, really big. A few years back, was 2013 or something like that, we had a near miss. One of the flares, one of the very strong X flares that was sent out by the sun, was a possible, was capable of doing a lot of damage, but it missed the Earth because that flare needs to be spot on with Earth when it actually happens, so that all the plasma gas comes towards the Earth, the biggest amount of it. And basically, the Carrington event it's not a, you know, so the problem with the X flares and the X, I would say the scale of X is that it typically kind of ends at 30. There's really no measures, or it's hard to say whatever it is. An example of that is one of the flares that happened, the one that happened in 1989 that actually dropped, it knocked out the power here in the province of Quebec. It typically was a very strong X flare. And if we had to measure it, some say it was probably something like an X35 or X40. It's a huge flare. The one that we had, very, very powerful one that we had that was a near miss, some say it could have been something like an X50 flare. The problem is the scale isn't made to go that high. We're just adding these numbers because we kind of max out at X30 or something. And that's the problem. We need to have better scales of, or maybe we need a new type of scale to measure the power of solar flares at some point. But it's apparently from the latest observations, because when they take samples of the Earth at different depth, so they go back in time and they can measure, and they were saying that in the ice caps, if they actually go down to the ice caps, they actually can see by the metals inside the ice caps how strong solar cycles were, and we're starting to see that in ice caps as we go down to hundreds of thousands of years and even millions of years back. But we also can see when there were some huge flares, because they actually alter, when they hit Earth, they actually alter the chemical composition of some of the Earth's materials. And we now know that when there are super big flares, that certain types of chemicals now are seen in layers of the ice or the Earth. So from those observations, they say that Carrington class flares seem to be something like once every 1,000 years or something like that. At first they were saying once every 100, then once every 200, and once every 500. It seems that it doesn't happen that often. Our sun is rather stable. There are, we're lucky because a lot of stars are unstable, completely nuts, and we could see flares, because actually we can see flares, and we can even see the cycles of other stars. So, for example, we know that some of the stars we look at in the sky have a cycle of a certain number of years. And every star that we measure have different cycle length. So the sun is 11, but there are some stars out there that have 3-year cycles. Some have 50-year cycles. and we can see and measure them from the distance, and see even when there's big flares happening on these stars. We can kind of measure that there was an output, a greater output of energy for a brief period of time. So thank God for one thing is that the Carrington events don't happen very often. But if they would happen today, it would be devastating. Right now while I'm doing the show, everything would stop, and we'd all lose power. And these are pretty crazy. Matt, nice to have you on board from Denver in Colorado. What else do we have? Let's go down. Let's go down. Yep, the early 90s was very good years. Absolutely. Kisha Escape says, all hams do start thinking like that. It's all I hear locally. Yeah, absolutely. Joey D says, contesting is okay for a quick listen, but I like the train nets. They've taught many times CB is very active. DX in 10 meters is down on arrival because nobody is there. It happens very often. Often when I hear Spartak E-Skip, CB in 11 meters is full of signals. 10 meters you can hear two or three stations in that set. Why? Because a lot of hams still continue on that habit of, when you don't listen to that, when you don't listen to the bands, you get into the habit of never going to the bands. Butterbean, nice to have you here. Maybe all the signals are energizing the airwaves. David Elkins, nice to have you on board from Houston, Texas. Yeah, nice to have you here, my friend. In CD Video, nice to have you on board from Windsor. Cool. Thank you very much. And WF7I Ombrus, as a recent example of DXing the solar minimum, back in the spring I made contact with a station in Australia on 40 meters. It was quite readable, and this is almost exactly halfway around the Earth. And that's where we got to be careful. It's a question of choosing the frequencies properly. Because, yeah, you're not going to have the same contacts on the same bands. And you got to adjust. It's a question of adjusting yourself to the cycle rather than shutting off your radio, honestly. Matt says, actually, it's funny how I can hear Saudi Arabia every day almost. They emit at 500 kilowatt. William Helms, yes, absolutely, here in Quebec. In 1989, there was a huge solar flare in March of 1989. And it knocked out the power across all of the province of Quebec for like 11 hours. So what happened that night is that a very, very big flare erupted a couple of days before. And in the night, I think it was the night of March 13th or 14th, 1989, that coronal mass ejection, that cloud of gas from the sun hit the Earth's magnetic field and created huge auroras. Here the problem, William, is that our power plants that create our electricity are 1,000 kilometers in the north. They are in huge rivers near James Bay. That's near Hudson's Bay. So if you look at a map of Montreal and you look at where James Bay is up in North Province of Quebec, that is like more than 1,000 kilometers away. That's where a big chunk of all the electricity we generate in the province is done, because that's where the huge rivers are for all of that power to be generated. That also means that there are transmission lines across the forest here that are 1,000 kilometers long. So just think about that. That's huge and amazing. And actually we had to do different types of electricity transport. We were the first places in the world that used 750,000 volts to transmit the electricity. Why? Because at 1,000 kilometers, the resistance gets high enough that it's a problem. So by boosting that electricity to very high levels, 750 kV, the loss is much less. So Uh, we were the first in the world to do tons of things that are amazing. We were the first to have that, the first LG1, LG2, LG3 stations in James Bay are the first underground power stations. They are under the rock, very deep under the rock, up north, because of the way that things are, and because over there it's like -40 in the wintertime, and as the weather is nasty. So there are all sorts of things that had to be thought of. We were the first in the world for many, many things. Actually, when China created its huge its hydroelectric dam, which is, I think, still the biggest in the world, they actually asked Hydro-Quebec specialists and engineers, because we had the expertise for such huge projects. So it's a very, very amazing thing that we have here for hydroelectricity, because almost all the electricity in Quebec is generated by hydroelectricity. It's rivers flowing, and we created these huge reservoirs by blasting right smack in the middle of nowhere in the forest to keep all of the water and to do all of that. It's crazy. There's actually a very nice documentary that I've seen a couple of months back, where the people, the workers that went there, that were about to talk about and check out that region, said that they thought that the government was crazy to think that we could take such a huge river and control it in our way to do electricity. And one of the construction workers says, we arrived there, we said, they're nuts, we're never going to be able to do it. And he says, 5 years later, we looked at it and said, man, we actually did it all and control everything here. So one of the biggest problems with the electricity grid here in Quebec is that we are sitting on the Canadian Shield. A big chunk of Canada is on a big rock. And the big problem with that is the soil isn't very, very thick in a lot of places. So the electricity that was generated, all the extra electricity generated by that the geomagnetic field going crazy in the auroras, had nowhere to go. So where did it choose to go? Of course, nice, juicy, long 1,000-kilometer power lines are fantastic to send electricity everywhere. So they actually started generating very huge currents within the 1,000-kilometer power lines, and actually blew up one of the really huge transformers at the LG2 power station. And because of that, mixed in with the fact that these extra currents were destabilizing the grid, it wasn't synchronized anymore, everything just shut down. And it took a lot of time before they could restart it. Since then, they did some modifications. I know that they added a lot more capacitors that are there to kind of absorb the extra current. So they added some really, really, really huge capacitors, actually, on the lines everywhere. And what that happens, it's, just like you use capacitors in a AC current transformer to smooth out the electricity. Well, they kind of used these to kind of smooth out the ripples, the extra ripples that could be coming from the fact that a geomagnetic storm could generate current. So it's crazy, but we lost electricity because of that. Now we haven't since then, but it shows that it's crazy. Absolutely, Randy. By Keisha's Cape, by the way. Absolutely, Randy. People were actually being burned and electrocuted because of the fact that in 1850 the telegraph wires were melting and there was like shocks everywhere because of all the electricity. So it's really crazy, really crazy. So it's really, really crazy. David Green says there was an article on Shortwave listening post today about another event called 1921 New York Railroad Storm. Researchers think it might have been comparable to the Carrington event. Kind of interesting. You know, we have a lot of we have a lot of these things that happen through time that are pretty amazing. I remember in 1989, in that evening, the auroras, because here in Montreal, okay, it's a big city, and light pollution makes auroras very difficult to see. And usually, if I see auroras, the solar, the K index. So you know, there's, and we're going to talk about the measures of solar activity. Let me refill my beer. The K index has to be very high. So the K index is a measure of geomagnetic storming activity, and it goes from 0 to 9. K9, major solar activity, major solar geomagnetic field. Sorry, not to mix in with solar activity necessarily. Usually, if it's K7 or more, I'm going to start looking in the skies. In 89, it probably was a K9. It was really not a dog, not a K9 as a dog, but a K9 class geomagnetic storm. And the auroras were very bright. The Carrington event, the auroras were so bright that they were seen in Cuba, which is a very exceptional place to see auroras. And here in the north, across the US, a lot of people thought daylight was coming because a lot of people didn't have clocks. And it was so bright outside because of the auroras that people thought the sun was rising. Current Patch DX says, I fully agree with what you said about solar minimum and the 10-meter band. Thank you for the awesome talk about solar cycles. Cool. Terry Cook, yeah, 1989 did damage some satellites, I remember. Even here in Montana, the entire sky flashed with auroras. Can you get 5850 or 9395? Let's see, 9395. Yeah, it's very strong too. 9395 is very strong. And 5850 is also quite good. Signals from WRMI are pretty good tonight, even 9395. Does anyone remember the red sky effect? Can't remember the year. Casey Red Dragon, nice to have you on board. Hey Mark Lesford, 73, nice to have. It was nice to have you here. So solar activity will affect, of course, the shortwave bands, but it can affect them daily because there's not just the ups and downs of solar activity. There's other things happening with the sun. Lately, what we've been hearing a lot of is there's, coronal holes. That's one of the things we hear often lately. Coronal holes. What are coronal holes? Well, what they do is that they are areas of the sun where the magnetic field isn't as intense, and the solar wind can escape more. So that can cause more disturbances in the magnetic field of the Earth, create auroras and create problems with the shortwave propagation, because there's not just solar cycles that cause problems with propagation. A solar flare, fast solar wind from coronal holes, that's what we're having a lot lately. What they do is the faster solar wind brushes against the Earth's magnetic field, creates disturbances. That also will degrade sometimes propagation. So you might have a day of bad propagation because the solar wind brushing against the geomagnetic storm is making it stormy, and so that means that the frequencies might not propagate well because more absorption in the ionosphere. So you got to remember that solar activity is a daily event, whether you're in the high or low solar point in the activity, and that daily activity is something that can change your propagation. I still remember that. I always tell that story of when I was listening to shortwave, and when I started, I didn't know and have nobody had an idea does this, that the sun affects propagation of radio waves on shortwave. I didn't know nothing about shortwave. I was like, well, you just tune and you hear these stations from everywhere. But at first I would hear stations and be happy, but then I would start hearing a station and noticing that 2 days later it's not there. And what comes to mind is not solar activity. What comes to mind is my radio's broken or my antenna's broken. And I always remember that when I was listening to, one day I was listening to KBS, well, which was, because KBS World Radio South Korea, back then was called Radio Korea. So back then that was Radio Korea. And I remember listening to Radio Korea on the same frequency they use today, 15575. But back then it would propagate because solar activity was high. And I remember the first morning, because it was like 14 UTC when I heard it, the first morning listening to it and thinking, oh wow, I'm hearing South Korea. This is so cool. And the second day, I woke up in the morning and I thought, oh man, I'm going to listen to South Korea again today. This is so cool. And I listened to South Korea. But the day number 3, I get up and I tune in. There's nothing. And I tune the other signals around it, and there's signals, but I haven't really noticed what signals they were. And I go back and there's nothing. And I think, my antenna's broken. And I remember taking down my 100 feet of wire, wondering what could be wrong with it. Could it something have broken the wire or something? And putting it back up and wondering what the hell is happening. And then noticing that, oh well, some days it's there, some days it's weaker, and not really understanding, because I didn't understand anything about the solar activity and the effect of radio waves. So of course it's later when I started reading in magazines and reading on in club bulletins that I noticed, oh look at that, there's solar activity that affects radio waves and radio propagation. So you got to remember that if you listen to a signal, it's not always the same thing, and that it's not always going to be there. So you can hear something one day, not hear it the second day, because maybe there's a geomagnetic storm, or maybe there was a solar flare and something happened. It's a very complex thing, and the interactions and understanding all of that is very complex. What helps me out here a lot is the fact that I have a lot of knowledge of astronomy. I've always loved astronomy. So the fact that there's a lot of astronomy knowledge and I have my radio knowledge helped me understand more of the interaction and being able to talk about it, which is kind of interesting. So there's a lot of that going on. One of the sites, 2 sites, well 3 sites actually I will share here that are kind of interesting. If you are wondering about what's happening on the sun and the interaction with the sun, well, one of the great websites that is easy to understand and has a lot of interesting topics is Space Weather. So here's spaceweather.com. One that is the simplest, and I will explain what it means, is on dx.qsl.net. You've got the indices, and I'm going to actually talk about this. So if you guys look at this website here that I just posted, which is the dx.qsl.net/propagation, that one is giving you numbers at the top, which is 3 numbers. And if you look at the numbers right now, numbers are SFI equals 68, A equals 4, and K equals 1. What does that mean? And that is the simplest form of understanding. That means you might actually understand a little more about the effects of your shortwave propagation and how good it will be today or not. SFI is the solar flux index. It's a measure of the output of energy from the sun. So it's basically a way to tell you how much energy the sun is actually sending out to us. It is measured, I believe, somewhere around 2,000 megahertz, 2,400 megahertz or something. And basically, it goes from 60 to 400. So it's 68 right now on this measure, and that's the measure taken at 05 UT, 5 minutes after the show started. So 60 to 400 is the measure in here. And the lowest I've ever seen it, I think, was 64. It just tells us we're at solar minimum, not a lot of output of energy. It can go to 400. The highest I've seen, personally, 353. I remember that number because I was taking notes of solar flux, and that's somewhere in the 80s, one of the big solar cycles of the 80s. The highest solar flux that we've seen on solar cycle 24 was somewhere around 160, 170, which is probably the lowest I've ever seen in a solar cycle. You know, I like a solar flux to be usually above 80, above 100, even more. And you can easily know that, you know, if the solar flux gets to 100, 10-meter band is probably open. It usually propagates a 10-meter band. It's enough. But that number, the higher it is, the more energy output, the more ionized the ionosphere. That means also that higher frequencies will propagate more. So 10-meter band will work. And even, you know, in very high solar activity, 6 meters was sometimes open. That's 50 megahertz. It also has an adverse effect. It sometimes, when the solar flux is very high, it can sometimes be negative on the effects of the lower frequencies. Sometimes nighttime frequencies might not be as good because the solar flux ionizes the layers so much that they don't actually come back to totally to normal during the night, to their average night levels. They sometimes stay a little higher than normal, and what happens is there's more absorption at lower frequencies. So sometimes lower frequencies are not as good. So a lot of people, you know, if you look at around the hams and DXers, you'll see that there are some DXers that love low frequencies that will tell you, you know what, I love it in solar minimum. I'm happy here. Solar minimum is perfect for me. Medium wave is an example. A lot of medium wave DXers will tell you solar minimum is perfect for medium wave or even long wave. Less absorption. But in general, I like to see that solar flux higher because I like higher frequencies. I like to listen to the 10-meter band and the 15-meter ham band and you know, have propagation on higher frequencies. It's a lot of fun. And what it does is often enhance a lot of what we do also, because one of the adverse effect of low solar activity is in the winter, very long winter nights, the ionosphere during the nighttime is ionized so little that the maximum usable frequency is extremely low, and you get to a point where even 7 megahertz from Europe has a lot of difficulty making it through. So 60 to 400 is the number, and usually as we go up in the solar cycle, you'll see these solar flux go up also. And during moments when a sunspot will appear on the sun, you'll often notice that if they talk about, oh, there's a sunspot, you often see the solar flux kind of rise because it's almost directly correlated. So that's interesting. Oh, it's a digital transmission on 5850. So anyways, the sunspots, the more sunspots on the sun often is pretty much is going to tell you that solar flux is going to rise also. So we technically, there's no, you know, that number doesn't have an ideal number. It just tells you the amount of energy the sun is output. And technically, I often say, well, the higher the better. But it, of course, depends on your range of frequency. But I rather have it higher than have it too low, like right now. Often the effects are better to have it higher. The two other numbers, A and K, are related to each other. K is the actual measure of the geomagnetic storm, or the geomagnetic field, sorry, of the Earth. typically it will tell you the state of the geomagnetic field. That goes from 0 to 9. Usually you want this to be 0 or 1, maybe 2, but nothing more than 2. You want to have it the lowest possible. The lowest possible, the less disturbance in the geomagnetic field, the less absorption on the ionosphere, the better propagation is generally. A is the average of the last 24 hours of the K index. A is, I think, from 0 to 100. Usually if K index goes up to 6, 7, or 8, well, the A index will really rise very high. I never really take a look at A because for me it's useless in a point that it actually tells you the past. It tells you what it was like in the past 24 hours. I like the K index for it's like this right now. K1 is good. And propagation tonight is actually pretty good. You want that number to stay as small as possible. Now that number, the K index, is color coded. You see here it's green. That means pretty cool. If it becomes past 3, it becomes yellow. Now that means, okay, we're getting to unsettled conditions. 5 and higher, it becomes red. That means that the geomagnetic field of the Earth is in geomagnetic storm. And that means more absorption most of the time. That means lower and bad propagation for a lot of signals. There are exceptions to the rule. Sometimes a geomagnetic field will enhance a certain part of the spectrum. For example, I've noticed a few times having a K index of 5 or 6, which means minor storm. Europe signals almost nothing, but stations from South America stronger than usual. Sometimes there are effects like that, but that's pretty much what you want. So in general, what you want to know is solar flux. The higher the better is pretty much what people want most of the time. But the K index, the lowest possible, is what you want most of the time. And that gives you a general idea of what propagation is all about. David Green, shortwave reception can be so temperamental. Some days WWV sounds like a faint music box buried in the mountains, yet Radio New Zealand is a blowtorch on 80 meters at night. You know, it's crazy. WS7I Homebrew, the main thing I miss about Sotomax is the 10, 12, and 15 meter bands. I still remember working Australia late in the evenings on 10 meter back in the 80s and 90s. That is true. That is totally true. KC Red Dragon, that's on WRMI. I believe it's one of those radio shows that has some digital transmissions in MFSK and stuff like that on WRMI, KC Red Dragon. Terry Cook says, I have to check out to visit a friend in the hospital, so take care, my friend, and hope everything's all right. Dave Todd says, I would get West Australia in the morning, pointed Africa way, and East Aussies in the evening. You know, sometimes I remember the big solar flux, and the big solar activity was really, really nice. And I remember those cycles of the 80s and even in the 90s. Man, I love these cycles. And I totally love 10 meters. I'm a guy that 10 meter band, when it's open, I kind of find it cool. You know, 10 meter band, even 12 and 15, you don't need a lot of power and you just make it so far away. So it's really, really nice for that. So, the last one that I want to share with everybody on the website is solarham.net. Lots of details of solar activity, and when there's solar flares and stuff, they often talk about it. So that's the other website that's nice. And here you'll have a general, and of course there's the propagation woman that is there. So you know, it's kind of nice, and really, really nice to have him here. That is 5850, what I was listening to, KC Red Dragon. It's WRMI out of Okeechobee, Florida, KC Red Dragon. Sheldon Harvey, nice to have you on board. No problem checking in late as we are talking about solar activity and the effects of solar activity and the geomagnetic storms and everything on the shortwave propagation. Test Forrester, nice to have you here. Would you ever do a live stream where you sit on a band and let viewers call CQ into a wall streaming at the same time? We actually did that once, where we I had kind of a amateur radio special, if you want. And what we'd do is we would let stations call in on the ham bands. And we've heard some stations, and we would have ham stations do calls and see if we can hear them on different the 20-meter band, 40-meter band. And basically we should do another one like that for sure. It'd be a lot of fun to try another one. David Green says, I've noticed a lot of consistency between sunspots and propagation. I read something about in the late 80s people would just throw a short wire up to the ceiling lamp and start DXing. You know, David Green, in the 80s, one of the things that was probably helping a lot in doing that is the fact that there was really low noise. You know, electronics was not yet doing a lot of damage to our hobby with all the high noise levels. So we could easily listen to shortwave. And to give you an idea, on the first week of me getting my first shortwave receiver, which was the Realistic DX100, and we're in 1982, we're close to a peak of solar activity, and there was a lot of activity on the sun back then. I listened to 21 megahertz. And I was always very curious on the bands. I always tell everybody, tune everywhere, because people tend to tune only specific areas. And it's easy to get past some of that, some of the signals. When you decide that, well, you know, above 20 megahertz I never hear anything, I'll never go listen there. And a lot of people do that, actually. And a lot of hams do that also. They just go there and they're like, well, you know, there's nothing on 10 meters ever, so I'm not going to go there anymore. Doesn't work. Doesn't happen. That band doesn't work. Yeah, that's not the way to do it. You got to go there regularly. So I was always very curious. And even in frequency ranges where I would almost never hear anything, I would still go and tune and see if I could hear something. And especially because I didn't know where to tune for some of the signals. One night, about maybe a week and a half into my new DX100 receiver, I tuned 21 megahertz, which is a 13-meter band. There's not a lot of activity in the 13-meter band lately on shortwave signals. But back then, because of high solar activity, a lot of stations were actually using 21 megahertz. And it was maybe 11 p.m. at night, so sunset, you know, a couple of hours back. So you're thinking, well, there's probably not going to be nothing on that frequency. And I hear a signal in English. And I remember it was good enough to listen to it. And I was listening and listening, and I was so curious to see what could that be. And I listened probably at least a good 20-25 minutes before it came to the top of the hour, and the guy said, "This is Radio Australia." And of course, now you got to imagine me as a 13-year-old guy jumping up and down in the living room, and it was just crazy. Look at the guy; they're sending in some signals on audio stuff here. So the thing is, I had, I don't know, 20 feet wire hung to a mirror or something in my living room. That's all I had. And I was getting 21740 Radio Australia with a decent signal. And I remember it was the only signal on that frequency range. But it was clear and it was good. And I remember listening to that frequency a lot back then. And man, those are amazing souvenirs. And I remember listening to Radio Australia. It was just crazy. Current Patch DX says, love Kevin's solar page. Been using it since its early days to monitor solar conditions and propagations. David Green says, I heard something on 26 megahertz recently, a voice of full broadcast, I think. It was legit and I was stunned. Well, what you heard on 26, what radio are you using, David? Because what you heard there could be a an image that your receiver is getting for very, very strong religious broadcast. Hey, Brother Steer on 1550. Wow, that's something you don't want to hear. 5207. Here we go. No, that's so 5200. It's a very wide signal, actually. So if you guys hear it, that is, I believe, some kind of radar. Around 5200 to 52, up to 5207, 05. That's. Here we go. It's very wide band. Look at that. This is so weird, and you can see the trace. Getting faster all the time. I would guess this is possibly some kind of radar, honestly. Vince Perrault says, I made a 49 meter band antenna, 39 feet on conductor, 39 on ground. I heard that I should short it when I go out of this band for better reception. What's your opinion on this? Do not short it, Vince. You know why? Because it's not so. Just to give you an idea, no, HARP is not active right now, VE3KRP. HARP will not be active until, I think it was late October or something that I've seen. So HARP is not broadcasting right now. RSP1A, yeah, I think it had an image or a false, I have spurious signals, David Green, on my RSP1A. From time to time, I have to shut off SDR Uno and restart the software so it resets the RSP1A. When you hear that, do that and you'll see the signal goes away. The RSP1A has this funny thing. From time to time. And I've seen it in many spots around the bands. You got to be careful with that. So Vince, to talk about that antenna. Okay, so 49 meter means that to have a full-length resonant antenna, you'd have to have it 49 meters long, which is a lot more than 39 feet. So what you did there was probably, maybe it's quarter wave, or I don't know. Out of like this, I can't really guess, but it could have been 21, David Green. Maybe you were in the 13 meter band. 21, there's 21.525, I think, that sometimes makes it. That you're probably listening to the 13 meter band, David. That I'm pretty sure you were on 21.525 or 505 or something like that. There is one station that I hear from time to time, not very often, but it's there. So Vince, I will answer your question one day. So basically, what happens is that your antenna is shorter than what the actual meter band. So it resonates. The idea behind the antenna is your antenna resonates at a certain frequency, and what happens is that no single wire is good for specific all the shortwave frequencies at the same time. So technically what happens, and probably what you have read, is that you have to, of course, technically you got to adapt it to the frequency you're tuning, Vince. That's for sure. So that means, yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying. If you move up in frequency, technically you should shorten the antenna to follow that resonance. Because the higher you go in frequency, the shorter the antenna needs to be. The problem is, on shortwave, you would need to have tons of antennas to resonate everywhere and have perfect reception. So I would just say leave it as is wherever frequency you're actually listening to, honestly, because you're resonating, say at 49 meter band, but you will resonate at other places in the spectrum. You will actually resonate up also. So that means there are parts of the upper spectrum where you will be resonating because you will be at some multiple of the resonance frequency, and it's going to work. So don't touch it. Just leave it as is. It's a very complex thing, and you would need to have tons of different length of wires to really resonate at every megahertz if you want, you know. William Hill says Vince is long for 49, but 40 is good. Keegan, nice to have you here, Northwest Arkansas. Liberty Green says we'll be quiet for a while. Could be wrong. It certainly seemed normal though. Not too bad. Above 10 megahertz in general lately. Yeah, you probably heard 21525 or something like that. Dave Todd says heard WRMI on 21525. Yeah, that might be the one that he heard, I think. So really nice. Yeah, that's possibly it, David Green. David Martin, I think that strong wideband signal is a Russian or Chinese over the horizon radar. Looks like there are matches on Signal Wiki. It's totally possible. Totally possible. Rufus Dutz has been working and listening. Very informative. Cool. But leave it as is, because you won't, yeah, you know, you'll always be playing around, Vince, with the length of your antenna if you want to resonate everywhere. And so just leave it as is. You're not gonna, it's not gonna be that bad. It's actually gonna be okay. You know, for listening, what I always say is just as long as you can, just the longest wire you can put out there, and that's it. And just, you're gonna be okay. So nice to have you here, Technical Todd. A little self-promotion here, by the way, guys. If you like what I do, paypal.me/shortwave. Remember that I'm here all the time. If you like what I do, a little something is always welcome. You can send to the Yahoo email also here. It's always appreciated. And you know, my internet bill is higher than normal because I do these shows. I need equipment, I need stuff, I need to buy new equipment regularly. So you know, this is I do these reviews and stuff. Great example, somebody was telling me today, you know, have you talking about the MLA30 loop is making a lot of people save a lot of money. And I was thinking, well, you know what, if I made you save $300 because you didn't buy that Walbrook or that W6LVP loop or 200, why not spare a little something and say, hey, I bought the MLA30 because you said it was good, and I didn't need to buy that really expensive one. Or here's a little something because you know, I paid less and I'm happy. It's very interesting because I'm getting exactly the same rant as the other guy, by the way. There's guy. I'm just gonna post the last link here. You can also become a patron on patreon.com/radio and computers and set up something every month automatically here and become one of my 12 patrons that I have right now. So you can set it up there. Be careful how you set it up. So it's funny because I read so many articles of the MLA30, and one of the guys that actually has one of the reviews was saying how it's an amazing antenna, and he's got a lot of ranting from people that say, well, that thing cannot be and is not as good as a Walbrook or as a, and so he stands by his words. I'm sorry, this thing is as good. And I've got quite a few. I actually deleted a few posts of people treating me like trash on the channel in the last couple of days because they're saying, well, you know, you're promoting cheap Chinese junk and you're not helping out here with USA made stuff or whatever. And okay, I'm sorry, but if it was a $20 thing, I wouldn't care. I would probably say, buy it from a local vendor or whatever because it's just 20 bucks. But when you're talking about 300 bucks, I'm sorry. Buy that Chinese MLA30, okay? Because I'm sorry, I had a hard time dishing out 500 for the W6LVP. But I did because I wanted to test it, and I did because I know on the channel here it's something that a lot of people like to see. And one of the things that I just want to say is if I would go back in time and have that MLA30 and know how amazing it performs, I never would have purchased a W6LVP. It's not worth that amount of money. I'm sorry. The Walbrook is not worth the amount of money that it's actually asking. That I've always found that these antennas are not worth that much money. Now, that said, the MLA30 at that price, at 40, the lowest price I've seen was $44 US. I'm just gonna tell you one thing. It's really, really amazing, and is as good, and it's all I'm gonna say. If you're looking for a loop antenna, and this is nice because it puts that antenna also in the range of what some people might buy, and that's good. Vince Bell says, just to make sure, when I say shorted, I don't mean to make it shorter. I mean, oh, short the conductor to the ground. Ah, okay, Vince. We didn't speak the same language. Not really. Not really. Not necessarily. If you short it to the ground, you're making an end fed or something like that. Not necessarily. You could try it out. You have nothing to lose. Just try it. Technical Thought says, I just scanned 150 channels on PL606 on the MLA. Not all of them are good, like most scans, but man, last night I was listening to New Zealand for quite a while, and that's pretty good distance. Cool. That's pretty cool. Really nice. So, hey guys, we're going to make it a little shorter than usual tonight. Hope you enjoyed the show. We have been on for 2 hours and 12 minutes. Pretty nice, eh? I'm going to take it easy for the rest of the evening. The next show, of course, Friday, September the 27th at 20 UTC. So if you can join in for that, we will be live on Friday. And of course, we'll have that regular show. So basically, hope you enjoyed the solar weather and the solar activity stuff. And it was a lot of fun to have you guys here tonight. Of course, we are here two days or 2 nights per 2 days per week. Sorry, Wednesday 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, 0 UT, and we are here on Friday 2000 hours UTC, and that's 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Interesting, Keegan, because conditions here are pretty good. They seem pretty good, actually. A lot of signals tonight. It was a lot of fun. So take care, my friends. It was nice to have you here. Hope you stay safe. And see you soon. See you Friday, 20 UTC. And love you all. Stay safe, please. Bye-bye.